I got strange looks. People couldn't understand how someone could be proud to be disabled. It took me 12 years before I could speak publicly about the car accident, before I felt like this story matters. And in order to...
Welcome to the Infinite Creative Podcast. My name is Fitz, and I got my amigo over here, Sean.
I'm Sean. Hey guys, and today we are with our guest Tiffany Yu. She is a disability rights advocate, and she is also founder of Diversability. And she also just let us know she's also the host of her own podcast, and I believe it's called Tiffany Yu. So she's also the winner of the Wave and Shorty Inaugural Elevate Creatives Fund. So we're super excited to have her on. So yeah, thank you, Tiffany. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So yeah, so let's kind of get in a bit. So we kind of looked it up ahead of the episode of what diversability is, but we definitely want to hear it from you. What is diversability? What is that you lead up?
Yeah, so Diversability, we're a membership community that is focused on elevating disability pride, building disability power, and advancing disability leadership. Those were a lot of fancy words. What does that actually mean? So one of the things, at least from my own journey, so about 26 years ago, I was involved in a car accident. My dad was driving. He unfortunately passed away. And I acquired a slew of injuries, including breaking a couple bones in one of my legs, permanently paralyzing one of my arms, and much later being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh my God.
And I felt really isolated and alone in my experience. And what I realized is that when we feel alone, we become even more disempowered.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they come to us and they say, okay, what type of advocacy issues is Diversability working on? Like, access to education, healthcare, employment. And I was like, first, we need friends. We need to know that we're not alone. And I know you laughed a little bit at that, but yeah. It's just, throughout the pandemic that we've experienced over the last couple of years, I think we've all felt what it felt like to be socially isolated and lack social connection, and use technology to figure out ways to connect with others. And the disability community is one of the most socially isolated and excluded communities out there. So I'm like, at the first point of entry, I want you to know you're not alone. I'm cheering for you. I'm supporting you. And once you feel like you have that, you actually find your own voice. And then you're like, oh, I know this is the advocacy area that I want to focus on. And then we'll cheer you on to go accomplish that.
Wow, that's so awesome.
Well, that is like a very dramatic story, how you got into that. I kind of can relate because my wife just had last year like an accident, and she basically has now a disability too. And I feel like there's a lot of people getting into disabilities and they don't know what to do, and life is changing. And yeah, what are your tips and what are like rights for people who just got out of an accident, they kind of recovered and they want to go get started in the working world?
So the first thing I'll say is that I actually think that we don't spend enough time talking about what I call disability grief. So for those of us who acquired our disabilities, I got into a car accident. Fitz, your wife had an accident. There's going to be a grief process. Our body has changed, or what we knew. I just had a fly over the camera. And so I just want to make space for the grief process. And I will say that my grief process, and I still think I'm in my grief journey, but it took me 12 years before I could speak publicly about the car accident, before I felt like this story matters. And in order for me to heal, I need to talk about this. So I would say first, make space for that grief. It's okay if you're sad. I've been disabled for 26 years. Like, a lot of people, they'll come to me and they're like, Tiffany, you're so loud and proud about your disability. I want to be like you. And I'm like, you have to kind of go through this nonlinear journey of grief. And I will say the last two stages of grief are acceptance and meaning. And I think when I kind of did research on those stages of grief and realizing that I don't know if that's the end, you'll, cycle through all the other ones. But when I saw that, I was like, oh, there is some acceptance I can have around this. And maybe that will be the start of my advocacy journey. And then that will lend itself into the meaning. To your other point, which was, how do we get back out there? I do think that for those of us who have non-mental health related disabilities, we don't spend enough time talking about how just being disabled in an ableist world impacts our mental health.
Yeah.
So being able to have that professional and informal support system, maybe it's UFITs, maybe it's other family, friends, professional support to be able to support you through that journey so that you feel confident enough to be able to show up in the wholeness of who you are.
Yeah.
So, all of that to say, she can join Diversability. Everyone is welcome, but that will be a great place for you to see. And I call these like possibility models and role models, the possibility of who you can become, even as you're navigating your own disability grief journey.
Yeah. So with that being said, is now Diversability, what is it? Is that a forum? Is that a group? Or is that, what is it exactly? So what can people find there? And what is like...
Yeah. So we have like 4 main things that we do. The first is our community. That's the most important part. We have 2 communities. One exists as a free Facebook group, and the other is kind of more curated support for people who are further along on their advocacy journey and want more visibility to build their thought leadership, to come on podcasts like this.
Yeah.
And then the second is events. So there's a neuroscientist out there who's named Vivian Ming, and she says the best way to tackle any type of bias is through real life continuous experiences with people who challenge your stereotypes. So that was a lot of words. So what that means to me is we need to convene people together, disabled and non-disabled people, to tackle disability bias. So before the pandemic, we were hosting events in a couple key cities, and then now we're hosting virtual events. In one of our communities, we host them every single week. Publicly, we're hosting them at least once every single month, tackling different disability topics. Then we've also got kind of a content educational arm where we're looking to amplify research and different materials that are out there. And then we have our version of like a Forbes 30 under 30, but it's called the D30 Disability Impact List. And it's a way for us to recognize disability leadership globally and give people a little bump in their advocacy and their thought leadership as well.
That's amazing.
That is really cool. I mean, so I guess one of the things that really stood out to me there was how you're not just trying to help people navigate. You're trying to also help them elevate, which is really cool. I really like that you're really trying to get their message up to the forefront as well, because I think that's something that we found in this podcast. We've had past guests that they've had obstacles or disabilities that they've overcome, and those are kind of the most interesting conversations, especially for people that have never had a disability or been around people with disabilities. I think we get this really weird and catered type of view of disabilities on mainstream media. So then when we hear the actual trials and tribulations, and not just that, but also like what their dreams can be, because I don't have a disability. I've definitely had some near-death experiences though, and I know that after those experiences, those ended up being a catalyst for a lot of change in my life. A lot of things changed pretty drastically after that, and usually for the positive. So I feel like that's something that's not talked about a lot, that a disability doesn't have to always cause like a negative outcome. It can sometimes cause a positive outcome in a weird way.
Yeah, I think that that traditional media has always framed disability as either a tragedy, like our sheer existence is tragic, or as superheroes, like we're the super crip. We are accomplishing all of these things. And I think one thing I've appreciated, at least over the last couple of years of myself becoming a creator, is that we're just coming on to TikTok or whatever the platform is to just show you who we are. Yeah. I used to have a whole series that was like on my dating life, and it was like not.
Well, nothing wrong with that, I would say. Yeah. With that being said, like, what are like the key things that you think are the most helpful now with social media and having a disability, so that you have like, you don't push your mental health too much? Because I feel like social media can be very bad even for regular people, and now you have like a disability and you do social media. So what is like the mindset you should have for social media and having a disability, and how should you approach that?
Yeah, I will say, I've had my social media channels for like 15 years. When Instagram came on, we were all posting pictures of, I don't know, like a random window and a table here and there. but I started, when everything during the pandemic, when many of us had to stay at home, And we at Diversability couldn't host in-person events anymore. And we actually, at the time, it took us maybe like 8 months to figure out how to pivot virtually accessibly. I turned to social media. And the first reason I turned to social media was I wanted to figure out another outlet for me to amplify my advocacy, to be able to reach people.
Yeah.
I have a series on social media called the Anti-Ableism series. It's got about almost 250 parts to it now. I started it in December 2020. And it's bite-sized ways that people can be a better ally to disabled people. So it's things that people say, things you can do, maybe research you should look into, the enormity of our community. And that series, the last time I added up all the analytics, has reached over 5 million people.
Wow. Congrats. That's awesome.
Thank you. Prior to the pandemic, though, our events, our largest event had 70 people at it. You multiply that by one a month or one every couple of months in a couple different cities. It's nowhere near the million. So that was kind of the first thing. Two other things I wanted to mention. For a long time, and I'm one of the recipients of the Elevate Creatives Fund, I was not really generating an income from my advocacy work. I call it my own version of creative entrepreneurship. So I was like Airbnb-ing out my apartment in San Francisco where I was living at the time. I was upselling furniture when people were moving. I had a whole corner of my apartment of like other people's furniture who gave it away. But I was trying to come up with creative ways that I could continue to do this advocacy work and also support myself financially. After becoming a creator, you have brand deals coming in, you have different types of partnerships and things like that. And I've made social media content on this. I've been able to support my advocacy career by becoming a creator through these different partnerships. And then the third thing I'll mention, I know I touched just a little bit on it before, is that we're now being able to showcase disability how we want. For so long, we have wished that traditional media, mainstream media, would cover our stories in just the everyday, I guess, boringness of who we are. But instead, they wanted this superhero, or they wanted this tragic story. They wanted to pull out your heartstrings. And instead, I have a video, probably one of my best performing videos, is like, here's how I cut my fingernails with a paralyzed arm. There's nothing about it, but it's just like, hey, I want to give you an insight into my life.
Yeah.
You may never see you may never see it in a movie or anything like that, but I want you to know that this is how I have learned how to adapt to do this.
That is very powerful. I feel like social media gives us now an insight in the everyday lives of people with disability, and it makes us understand like, oh, people are actually struggling with like basic tasks in a way, and it's very interesting. But I kind of want to go back to the Creative Fund. So what made you apply, and what are the plans with the Creative Fund? Since you I think you won.
She was one of the winners. Yep.
Yeah,
I am one of the winners. I'm one of 6 winners. So why did I apply? That's a good question. I will say that in the early years of my advocacy work, I noticed that there were a lot of awards for visibility with no funding attached. And as I have moved on further in my advocacy career, I'm like, those awards are nice, but if there's no like real financial monetary component to help you support and amplify your work, then you're still stuck in I don't know, I call it like advocacy fatigue or advocacy burnout. So I ended up applying because my big creative project this year and going into next year is I'm working on a book. And the book is called the Anti-Ableist Manifesto. And you'll notice I had a social media series called the Anti-Ableism series. It reached a lot of people. And now we have a book that maybe, I hope, will be able to reach millions more. So
that's amazing.
So I applied. So one of the things I love about the work, I'll share 2 things. One thing I love about the work that we do at Diversability is we try to live by our values. So everyone that we hire onto our team is someone who identifies as a disabled person. And even if they're not ready to identify yet, they do have a disability. So I want to share that nuance there, that there is a large group of people who have what we call non-apparent disabilities. This is ADHD, dyslexia, autism, anxiety, depression, chronic illnesses, asthma, substance use disorders. There's so many of people who don't have physical disabilities. They're not apparent, who may not feel ready to identify as disabled. But anyway, so everyone on our team is disabled. So every partnership that we do, all the money that we make kind of gets reinvested back into the community as well. And so for me, applying for this fund, I just knew that whether it goes to help support making this book a success, maybe it becomes, I don't know, I had this dream to create like a book fund where for people who can't afford the book, we have a fund available so that if it's cost prohibitive, we can make sure that they get access to it. Or maybe it's a library fund. Who knows? I still have to finish the book. So there's kind of one big thing that needs to happen before all of that other stuff. But either way, the money will get reinvested back into the community. And, when I saw it was $20,000, I personally haven't seen that level of award money associated with something going toward creators or creative entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's amazing though. Like I feel like, especially if you have a disability and you're new to it, and it's kind of, there's a stigma like asking for help, and I feel like it's a very important thing to ask for help, even as like young creatives like we are. You should look, are there funds? Is there help for certain problems that I have, so that you can reach out and maybe there is help. And obviously it is an important step and message to looking for help and trying to apply for the help.
So I did want to add on to, I kind of wanted to bring it back. So I guess what inspired you to create this book? I'm interested in the title, the Anti-Ableism. Can you talk about that? What is ableism and why are we anti-ableist?
Yeah, so ableism, the definition that I use is when we devalue someone based on the way their body and or mind works. I'm going to repeat that again. So the way most of us, if you go to the dictionary will say ableism is discrimination or bias on the basis of disability.
Okay, yeah.
My definition is when we devalue someone based on the way their body and or mind works. So that could be disability, it could be women's bodies, it could be how we've treated melanated bodies, or melanated skin tones. So I also wanted to highlight that ableism is much more pervasive than just treating someone with a disability, devaluing someone who has a disability. That's why I say devaluing someone based on the way their body and or mind works. Anti-ableism is what are the actions that we can take so that we're valuing someone, we're just valuing everyone equitably. And so, in 2020, I had a friend, Nicole Cardoza, who started a newsletter called the Anti-Racism Daily. And at that particular point in time, with the murder of George Floyd, a lot of us were confronted with our own, the ways that we upheld either white supremacy or were racist in our own ways. I started to really get a lot of questions around better understanding intersectionality. So, okay, we're doing the work to read these books around how we can be anti-racist, but what does it look like to be anti-ableist? So that was the inspiration behind me wanting to start a series called the Anti-Ableism series. It started as the Anti-Ableism Daily, and then I just didn't have the capacity to do it daily. So it just became the series. And then I think as it started to, and what's been cool about it, I've been thinking about when you get a brand partnership and the best way you can make an ad not look like an ad. I mean, sometimes you see these things and they are definitely ads. They're like, here's this, lipstick thing. I've been able to do some brand partnerships through the Anti-Ableism series that are just so integrated within the series. So,
nice.
I did one with and I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about. I did one with a sexual wellness company. I guess that's what they call themselves. And I could talk about how sexual health is a part of health for disabled people as well. So
not often thought about, but yeah, definitely. I like that.
And that's the thing, is like, there are all these things that we don't think about. Even with regard to a disability experience, like, we as disabled people, like, maybe we want to be homeowners, maybe we want to get married and have kids. And sometimes people are so fixated on our medical condition that they like forget that we have, like you said, Sean, like dreams and aspirations as well.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is something that as we talk just becomes more and more obvious to me. I mean, what's your thoughts on the word disabled and disability? I mean, is that something that word needs to change at all? What's your thoughts on that? Just us even using the word disabled.
Yeah. So I have a chapter in my book called Disability is Not a Bad Word. There's a lot of power and weight in identifying as disabled. So
okay.
All of that to say, one thing I learned about is something called semantic satiation. And what that is that the more that you say a word, it loses whatever power it previously had.
Oh, interesting.
And so I think that we've grown up in a society where we have, in the 1990s, right after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, there were terms like, and we call these euphemisms, like differently abled, unique abilities, special needs, that kind of became more popularized because people were so uncomfortable with disability.
Right.
But it's not called the Americans with Different Abilities Act. And can I share just a brief story?
Yeah, please do.
I had a friend who was traveling internationally, and she has like a back injury. And that requires her to have a specific type of seating or, special cushion. And especially for a long flight, right? She had some, what we call access needs.
Yeah.
And she told the attendant, or she told, the airline staff, but she phrased it as, I have challenges. And I went, and she was so frustrated because no one accommodated her, and the fact that she needed a certain type of chair to be able to be comfortable. And she was in pain, the whole 12-hour flight.
Jeez.
And she came back to me and she was like, to me, it was so infuriating. And I said, did you tell them you had a disability? And she said, I don't feel super comfortable with that word. And I was like, when you mention it, when you mention you have challenges, people don't know what that means. But when you say, I have a disability, like, if you're part of the airline staff, there are certain things that you have learned about how to engage with our community. It may have been a different conversation and a different experience with her going through that process.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. It's like when, especially when we're talking about on a legal level, on kind of a larger political level, even, if you don't use these words, then people may not understand, right? They may not actually understand this is a serious thing.
Well, then I'll have people come to me and they'll say, we all have different abilities. And I'll say, some of us have disabilities and can request reasonable accommodations for them. And some of us don't have disabilities, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I think in our attempt to try to soften, I call it like we've just put so much negative value judgment on this word disability, while to me, it's just a neutral thing. And many of us within the disability community are finding our power in identifying as such. We even have a merch store at Diversability where our one piece of merch, I don't know if you've ever seen that design that says like, thank you a bunch of times, have a nice day, like when you order takeout. Ours says disability a bunch of times and then is not a bad word. And we've sold... How many of those have we sold? I mean, we've sold over, probably 500 of those. And I love that that message is getting out in the world in such a bold way. But I do agree with you. It's like, there's the legal, protection side of things. But it's like, if you're part of the reason why I have wanted to talk more about anti-ableism is that we don't realize the ways that ableism is so pervasive in our society. Even our fear and our discomfort around the word disability is just a small example of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So a lot of our viewers, they're young creatives. I think a lot of us as young creatives, we're usually in this kind of weird category, even with our own families and stuff, where we have these kind of weird wants and desires and aspirations. And I just know a lot of creatives that have had to kind of fight that. Now to think of being, a creative person who's also disabled, what would be, some of your advice to those people? Let's say, I'm a high schooler, I have a disability, I want to move into a creative field. What would be your advice to that person?
Yeah, I want to share 2 resources that I have been affiliated with. Okay. So I first want to share a stat, which is that despite being 26% of the US population disabled people, we are only represented in less than 1% of primetime ads. So being able to have disability representation, and I actually did research on this. There's a lot of fear from the creative industry, advertising and marketing, because they're terrified of getting it wrong. We live in such a fickle cancel culture. So true. But there are ways, but like, we're here. And so the 2 resources I want to share are, one is called Creative Ladder. And this is a nonprofit that was started by Ryan Reynolds to really help get more underrepresented talent into the creative industry and, help support them through mentorship and different programming. Awesome. The second is, and this is one I'm participating in right now, and they didn't pay me to talk about this. No one paid me to do anything, but it's called the One Creator Club. And it's a 20-week tuition-free program where every single week we are partnering with a different advertising agency, given briefs. It's pretty intense, so I want to headline it with that. But as someone, so I never considered myself a creative until I started realizing just the lack of representation in not only on the staff, but also in what we're seeing on the screens. Yeah. And the representation, I do have a chapter in my book about representation. When disabled kids are able to see themselves as creative directors, as Paralympic athletes, all the things that advertising covers, the whole gamut, ketchup, it starts to change their view of who they can become. And, I think about 9-year-old Tiffany a lot in my work. And as a newly disabled 9-year-old kid, my worldview was so limited. And Fitz, I have a feeling that maybe for your wife in her early disability journey, she may feel something similar as well. But when your worldview is so limited of who you can become, you start to internalize that for yourself. So all of that to say, I feel really excited about the power that social media has to showcase all different types of disabled role models and possibility models. And to come back to your question around disabled creatives, and I know I shared a couple of those resources, but I guess I would share the message that even if you feel alone, there is a whole community of us out here who are cheering you on, because a win for you is a win for all of us. And having you in those rooms where those creative conversations are happening about who is cast and different things like that, that's super important. Yeah. So I will also, I don't know if you have brands who listen, because I know we talked a little bit about advertising. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety around getting it wrong. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, you can build a relationship with our community. Like, this is part of why I love the communities that we've built, because it's all about, and even you following a disabled creator on social media, it creates intimacy. And I actually think that's where the best allyship comes from, is knowing someone, and I don't mean intimacy. I know we talked about sexual wellness earlier. I just mean intimacy in terms of really knowing someone, not just knowing the demographics of who they are. And this is why I love social media too, is you create what I hope are healthy parasocial relationships. I know there's the other side of that as well, but I've made a lot of friends on social media, and it's cool to be able to meet them in person. And I know that, whether it's this book coming out or another initiative I have, I can turn to my friends, my now friends, to be able to say, hey, this book coming out, it's a BIPOC disabled author. We know the publishing industry is so white. I'm working on it. You know, I have so many other disabled friends who are getting book deals right now. Like, I think we're starting to see a little bit of a shift.
Yeah, I really love that because we actually we had a situation where we had a guest on, and he does like social media content and everything, and his name is Phil, and we did not know that he had Tourette's, and I'm like, he did not want to highlight that on social media, and I was like, kind of like, you should highlight that so you can speak up and basically inspire other people with disability, and I'm like, it's really like underrepresented because like I did not know like that there are people with disability, they're talking to me and I don't even know, you know, it's like very scary. And I feel like they should like speak up more in a way because like it brings hope.
I guess what I will share is that so about 70 to 80% of disabilities are not apparent. So your friend Phil with Tourette's, you know, a lot of people who have non-apparent disabilities. Part of the reason why they don't speak up is because of all of the pre-existing shame and stigma that exists around disability. You know, we had a whole conversation around, can we say this word? We have so much fear just around the existence of it. And so I think that is part of the reason why I am so loud and proud. But I also want to acknowledge and make space for, like, we are working to, whether it's unlearning ableism, you know, if that seems advanced for people, it's unlearning shame, unlearning stigma that we have around it. And once we start to unlearn those, we get to a point, you'll actually start to see more people who have disabilities that maybe you weren't aware of start talking about them. And that's actually been like a big win for me, is that I have friends that I've known for almost 10 years who now are going on to LinkedIn to talk about living with PTSD or the time that they were hospitalized for their mental health or their vision disorders. And I was like, 10 years ago, so I've been doing this work since 2009 for 14 years. When I told someone that I wanted to start a community around disability pride, I got strange looks. People couldn't understand how someone could be proud to be disabled. And then I actually couldn't get anyone to join. And now, like, Diversability's ecosystem is over 80,000, you know, and every single week in our community, you know, our Facebook group, I don't do any marketing. Maybe we have good SEO. We have like 30 to 50 people joining every single week because they're looking for a community. But it also shows me people still are very alone. They're isolated. They're not sure where to turn for community. I guess I feel grateful for Facebook groups that, you know, you can go and search something and find people who share a common identity or common interests. But yeah, I think a lot of the work, and hopefully maybe someone listening to this will hear this episode and maybe they'll go on to LinkedIn or maybe they'll reach out to me and share their story or join their community and be on their journey. But that's why I think, Sean, you know, I'm very specific about using the phrase disability pride versus raising disability awareness, because I think you can still be aware of disability and think that it's a tragic thing, think that it's bad, think that we're broken and need to be fixed. But when you phrase it in terms of pride, it's saying, hey, I know that my body is different or the way that my mind works is different, but I want to accept and acknowledge the wholeness of who I am while living with this as well.
Well, yeah, I love that, because I think that is ultimately how you fight it. Is you have to be proud of these things in your identity, and honestly, that it's sometimes a superpower that it creates this strength. I love it when I see people that you know have a disability out in the world, and you just see that they're such a performer because they have to. They have, you know, every day. Sometimes for some people, it's hard to get up out of bed and get going, and so you know. In my experience, the people I've met out in the professional world that had a disability worked 10 times harder than the people without a disability, and they were usually kind of a superstar in their world. You know, in the web, thankfully, in web coding and web development in general has been really good for people that have some type of physical disability. So I've ran into people with things that you'd be surprised in how they even got to work, and then they're doing amazing, groundbreaking projects and leading teams of people. So it's great that to have people like you that are not just out there trying to, create just a safe space. You're saying, no, like, let's go out there, let's cause trouble. Let's really put our voice out there.
Good trouble.
Good trouble. But well, and one thing so I did want to go back. So there was a moment in this that really caught my ear where you said you had to start to be creative, and I think that's interesting. So a lot of people, when they start a nonprofit, or they kind of go down this path of like, I'm going to solve this mission, I think almost everyone has to kind of be forced in this lane to be creative. Is there this moment for you that stands out that creativity had to happen for you to achieve your goals?
So I guess creativity started when I was 9 years old and I lost use of my dominant arm.
Yeah.
But I'll share a story from my childhood and then kind of like a shift later on. But one of the things is that, as disabled people, we are some of the most creative, innovative, adaptive people out there because we've had to be, right? Sean, you mentioned us working 10 times harder, and sometimes that can be exhausting too. Like, we need breaks, we need rest. But I have this memory where in the immediacy of the car accident, I had a cast that went from my thigh and right to the tip of my toes. I'd broken my femur and my tibia. Whew. And I don't know if understandably so is the right word, but no one in my family wanted to bedpan me. So I had to figure out a way to get to the bathroom with this huge cast on my leg. Yeah. And so there were about 3 steps for me to get from, the ground level of my house to where my room is, to my bathroom. And I figured out how to get out of my wheelchair on my own, get onto the step, and then shift my cast leg over, slide my butt over. And then when I got onto the toilet, I took maybe this is too much information. I took a Halloween trick or treat bucket and I flipped it upside down, and I would rest my cast foot on it while I went to the bathroom. And that's probably my earliest memory of having to. I call us expert life hackers, of trying to figure out how to get creative about, like, this is something that I need to do. In this, Fitz, you're talking about asking for help, and like, interdependence, independence, we're shifting through all of these different states. And in that particular case, I guess I had to figure it out, and I figured it out. And I've kind of used that mentality of like, I'm going to figure it out throughout the rest of my life. But I think in terms of like creativity, sparking, I don't know. So interestingly enough, I know we didn't talk about this. My background is actually in financial services. So I worked at big banks, and up until 2016, 2017, I was always, I viewed my advocacy as like being a part of these big companies' disability employee resource groups and kind of doing advocacy like within those companies. In 2017, I actually ended up getting fired from a startup job that I had gotten. And I told myself that, I was on unemployment insurance, you get your unemployment benefits. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to try to see if I can figure out this entrepreneurship thing. And that's where like the Airbnb, and I will say at the time, like, I just think the gig economy can really, there's a lot more there than I think we give credit for. And now I'm not recording this from LA, but I moved to Los Angeles last year, and the number of rideshare drivers who have creative businesses as well, and are trying to figure it out. And I love living in Los Angeles because I'm in the land of creativity, where so many people are multi-hyphenates, meaning that they are doing a bunch of different things, but also like we're all trying to figure it out. So I don't know if I have a good like distinct memory of where creativity came in, but I think that's why I love the emergence of short form video. It was not something that I felt super comfortable with. Like, I'm someone who talks for a living, but like I hate hearing the sound of my own voice.
Amen.
But then here I am in my own home. I can only use one arm, and I'm trying to record content. And a tripod and Bluetooth, and I don't know. I think I found a lot of joy out of viewing that as an outlet for my creativity, or like thinking of different creative ways of how do I record an unboxing? Like, you see, I don't know, people.
Yeah,
it's true.
And actually I have it. I hold the phone in between my knees.
Yeah. Gotta get creative.
Yeah, you got to get creative.
Yeah, with that being said, I kind of want to go back when you mentioned like you worked at a big company, and I feel like big companies do usually a good job-ish with like helping people with disabilities, but there's also small companies, and like having a disability and getting accommodated, it seems like it's like very complicated, and you kind of get like pushed out of those smaller companies and pushed into bigger companies. What are like common problems that you see when you're like having a disability and you work for either small, big company? What are like the common problems?
Yeah. So one thing I want to share, as you can tell, I think that data is important.
Yeah.
So there's a resource called the Job Accommodation Network, and they're updating these numbers every single year, but about 49.4% of job accommodations cost $0 to implement. So Fitz, I know your question was about the problems.
Yeah.
So I will say the biggest problem is that because, again, there's so much shame and stigma around identifying as disabled, a lot of people who could receive accommodations aren't asking for it because they are nervous about getting treated differently, or if they'll be pushback, or if they'll be negatively impacted in terms of their career trajectory by identifying as such.
Yeah.
So there's another stat, I'll share one other stat and then I'll share some resources, but the other stat is that about 3.2% of disabled people within companies are actually disclosing.
Wow.
3.2%.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that number is increasing, and depending on how you cut the data, it will, but it's still low, right?
Super
That's a
low.
very low number of people who are feeling comfortable being transparent. We call this self-ID, like self-identifying as such. So that's actually, to me, the problem is that we have so much internalized, and I call this internalized ableism or internalized shame around asking for accommodations. I'll share one quick story. So as I mentioned, one of my arms is paralyzed. It was my dominant hand, and I have now learned, now in my mid-30s, that as a kid in school, I would have been eligible for something called an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. So that means if I'm taking a test and there's an essay, maybe I get a little bit of extra time because I'm writing with my non-dominant hand.
Yeah. That makes sense.
But my mom, not to blame my mom, sorry, my family, or I think my mom didn't want me to view myself as a disabled person because of the negative view around it at the time, that I didn't get extra time. And now looking back, Sean, you mentioned like we're working that much harder. I'm like, it didn't have to be that hard. I could have gotten extra time to write the essay. So all of that to say, like, accommodations to me promote equity. They say, we want you to be able to do your job in the best way you know how. Here are the tools that we have available so that you are able to do them. If you have employers who are tuning into this episode, I do want to, one resource they can use is called the Job Accommodation Network, and it's free, and they have like an A to Z list of suggested accommodations for different types of disabilities. That's awesome. But really a big part of it is how can we co-create a workspace together that makes it so that you can do your best work. So, I started my career at Goldman. Every new hire at Goldman Sachs, every new hire had an ergonomic assessment done of our workspace. And when the ergonomic specialist came to my area, I ended up getting a second monitor, which many other people got. I got a left-handed mouse. Did you know a left-handed mouse exists?
I did not.
I got a keyboard wrist pad, which a lot of other people got. I got a step stool so that my feet wouldn't hang off the chair, not related to my disability, just related to my height. And then the ergonomic specialist asked, like, would you benefit from speech to text technology? So keep in mind, probably up until that point, no extra time on tests. Like, I wasn't really identifying as disabled at the time. I was on my own grief journey. I had never heard of speech to text technology. I don't know if you have ever sent a text message on your phone and used speech to text, like,
yeah, nowadays,
hey, comma,
does.
on my way. Yeah, now everyone does. And so I guess I just wanted to highlight that I just loved that the company that I started at was proactive about making sure that every person had this assessment of their workstation so that we could show up at work best.
That's awesome. Yeah. And one thing about that's really cool is that it wasn't just you, right? It's all employees. And I feel like that seems to be the most important thing, right? Is we have to have empathy for all workers, right? We have to have empathy for everyone. And so I think it's like, if we just have that baseline of empathy, it seems like then we're going to be helping the disabled people, the non-disabled people. Because I feel like that's part of the stigma, right? Is that we have this corner where we have to help these people, but then everyone else we don't really have to help. But if we help everybody, then that is inclusion as well. So, that's why I loved in your story is that everybody got the ergonomic study. So there was inclusion that everybody needs help. It's not just people that are disabled. It's everybody needs help with ergonomic stuff. So
I feel like it goes kind of back to like when you work in a company and they're just like, okay, there's wasted potential if you don't help those people, It's like if everybody has 2 monitors and they're more productive, it's a win-win. So they should help everybody and like the people, especially with the disabilities, so that they can do their hard work and thrive.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think about, I guess I'll say 2 things. Yeah. I know I'm just saying a lot of 2 things. But the first is that, I think, so remote work was a reasonable accommodation that a lot of disabled people had requested for a long time. And it took a pandemic for us to realize that it could be possible. And we're actually seeing the employment numbers for disabled people increase because now there is remote work or hybrid work. But in addition to that, while we were all at home joining these virtual meetings, some people would be like, hey, I'm going to be camera off today. Or like, hey, like my dog is barking in the next room, or my kid might come in. We're all vocalizing what may happen, or what we like, hey, I have to go pick up my kids. Those are all different examples of access needs that in this kind of remote environment, we all started to realize like, hey, not only can we make remote work, but we can be more vocal about not only whether there are boundaries or what our access needs are, or what, what's going to show up so that we can manage expectations.
I love that. That's a good point.
Yeah. With that being said, like what were like the trends in 2023, like last year, basically, and what is like probably going to change? Will be there more work from home? Will be there less? Because now there's like kind of the weird pushback where it's like you're less productive if you work from home, and then I don't know who's pushing there, because like I think it's a good thing to work from home, and I feel like it can be productive. Like you see there a trend going on, or what is like your thoughts on like the next year?
Yeah, I'll share 2 trends. One is specifically around employment. So we are seeing what we call, or I guess let me take a step back. So effectively, the unemployment rate for disabled Americans has remained relatively unchanged since 1991, which was 1 year after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. So in 30 years, we really haven't seen a change until 2022. And we started to see that gap close a little bit due to 3 things. Number 1 was remote work. Number 2 was there was a labor shortage in some retail and hospitality roles. So more disabled people were hired into those. Those are kind of like very large labor chunks. And then number 3, there's a new disability called long haul COVID that a lot of people are navigating. I think about 1 in 10 people who it's 10 to 30% will have long haul COVID symptoms, which is considered a disability, and they have jobs. And so you saw those numbers close. And for me, where I would love, outside of this book coming out, where I want to focus my energy going forward is doing everything we can to, and I guess I am doing it already, to reinvest money back within the disability community to close the disability employment gap. Because the truth of the matter is that we've had a lot in place for over 30 years, but what needs to catch up are the hearts and minds. And I know hearts and minds sounds very soft, but we've talked so much about stigma and shame around disability that is still existing, and you've had disabled people on your podcast, and, and it's the representation and the visibility, kind of getting those reps in so that it's not so sensationalized that a disabled person is here. So that was kind of the first trend. And yes, I think fits to your point. I think we are going to see a return back to more hybrid roles. And I do fear what that might look like for the disability community. Yeah. But I'm also thinking, as disabled people, I would imagine that our home workspaces, we've been able to figure out how to make it work best for us. Yeah. Again, like in this case, we have a chair that works for us, the multiple screens, the left-handed, all the things that I got in the ergonomic assessment. We made, some of us, we made our home workstations work best for us. Yeah. And I do a lot of work from my bed. I'm joining you from a bed right now, so.
There we go. We never had that one.
I know. I think we need to copy this style, I think.
We need to copy this style. But yeah, so like, and I even think about when I worked at Goldman, so I type with one hand, I'm doing these pitch books and these, my Excel models with one hand. And whenever I would get comments back on, getting the next iteration of the model or the pitch book, I would always negotiate that I would turn it in first thing the next morning. Yeah. Because I knew that, at 7 or 8 p.m., maybe you're not, the senior people on my team wouldn't necessarily be looking at it. But if you gave me more time, it didn't matter how I got my work done. It would be on your desk first thing in the morning. So that's kind of on the work side. The other trend I want to mention is that I know we talked a lot about social media. So Nielsen actually did some research about the ROI of working with disabled creators. Yeah. And I don't have the stats in front of me, but they're good. Yeah. And so I think we're going to see a trend, hopefully more of a trend of a lot of brands are feeling more comfortable working with disabled creators and doing these brand partnerships together. Yeah. Are we going to start to be able to see more of that go into traditional advertising and media as well?
Yeah, I love that. But I got a question. We talked a couple times about your book. When does your book come out?
Yes. So
what's the timeline on that?
Yes. So the book is called the Anti-Ableist Manifesto, and it is coming out on October 8th, 2024. Okay. And yeah, can I share one last story?
Yeah, 100%.
On my hope for this book? Yeah. I love stories. So I had a TEDx talk come out in 2018 called The Power of Exclusion. And essentially, it was a 10-minute talk detailing the car accident. And the hardest part of becoming disabled for me was the social exclusion. It was not being picked for a sports team, for a PE class, for a physical education class that I had to get dressed for every single day. Mm-hmm. And that, I called it chronic exclusion, became the microaggression that fueled all of my work around community, wanting people to never feel alone and to feel included. Mm. A couple of years ago, I went to a camp of people who have my injury. So my injury is called a brachial plexus injury. And it was adults who had my injury, kids who had my injury with their parents, and doctors and people who care for people who have my injury. And this pediatric hand surgeon came to me and he goes, "Tiffany, I watched your talk." And I will say, I didn't have the best relationship with medical professionals growing up. I felt like I had no autonomy over my own body as a kid. Yeah. It was other people making decisions. So I was just like, oh, cool. And then I walked away quickly. And then he came back and he said, "Tiffany, I watched your talk. And because of your talk, I have added mental health support to our entire rehabilitation team." Oh, that's awesome. So for my specific injury, you have a hand surgeon. Sometimes you have a neurosurgeon, a shoulder person, occupational therapy, physical therapy. I call it the alphabet soup of medical professionals. But now he added mental health support because of that talk. And I did not realize that and that's I call this microsystemic change. Mm-hmm. That's someone in a field of work that I'm not in, who has the ability to support kids like me. I was a kid, to not have it be so hard emotionally. And so my hope for this book is I guess what happened with that pediatric hand surgeon, but like in book form. I hope someone reads this book, or maybe even as a function of this conversation, views the word disability in a different way, or starts to think, what are some ways that I can remove some of the stigma and shame around disability?
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm realizing that my ADHD or my neurodivergence is a disability. And I want to start being a part of the community and learning more about the things that I can use my platform to advocate for.
So amazing. I mean, I love everything you're doing. I know we didn't really get to this that much either, but do you have a podcast as well? Are you on YouTube?
Yeah, let's talk about that. I like that creative world.
So my biggest creative outlet right now is being a creator. TikTok is my biggest platform. Okay. I am attempting to be more active on YouTube, but
love it.
Right now, I do have a podcast. It's on pause right now. Oh, okay. It's been on pause for a long time. And I didn't want to turn into one of those people who's like, I'm going to start a podcast. And then you like do, but you know how often that happens. Then we like do 50 episodes and then we're like, man, this is so much work.
Mm-hmm. It really is. People don't know.
It is. And Fitz, I'm impressed you're doing all of the editing. I mean, I was pulling all-nighters because I was on a weekly Tuesday release, and I was like Monday at 8 p.m. I'd like open Descript. But my podcast, it was a labor of love. I am looking to bring it back. I think one of the things I personally loved about doing my podcast, and I feel like you may feel the same way, is you do develop intimacy with your guests. Like you do get to know them, deep dive, learn more about their stories. And the premise of my podcast was that I have a very, active disability-centered audience. I want to introduce them to other social issues, social impact causes that they should know about.
Interesting.
Whether it's Black Lives Matter or, I will say season 2 was very disability focused, but like mental health in I don't know, go. It's as you can tell, it's been on pause for a little while, but I do feel committed to bringing it back in 2024.
Yeah. Well, you're great at speaking. You're definitely great about talking about the mission, and I definitely love how and I definitely want to go watch these because it is cool where you're breaking down the walls, right? We kind of had different disabilities separated, or people that have different things that they're fighting, and it's interesting. I feel like this podcast, it sounds like you were breaking down those walls. We're like, well, no, look, we actually have a lot in common in our goals and missions. So yeah, you should. I think you have a good way, it seems like, of bringing people together.
Yeah.
But
I will say.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, okay, up there.
Oh, I was gonna say, you might not know, but I'm a super introvert.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think, right now my focus is, even though we've grown our community to 80,000, or our ecosystem at Diversability, there are 61 million people in the US alone who are disabled. So that number sounds big, but we're still not reaching a lot of people.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a lot of people who are alone and isolated. And I want them to know, I even look at I'm like patient zero, essentially, where I'm like, I felt really isolated and alone. I found other people. We didn't even talk about the other things, but Diversability, I started this community, I met other people, and then I found my voice as an advocate, and I got to serve on the San Francisco Mayor's Disability Council. I led the proclamation of July as Disability Pride Month in San Francisco. And so cool. San Francisco is not a small city, No. And I was like, this is what having a group of people who are in your corner can do for you. But it kind of starts with building one person at a time.
That's powerful.
Yeah. Well, and putting yourself out there, which you've definitely done. I think that's the coolest thing is the more people you touch, the more people that see you, even the listeners of this podcast, it's gonna, I can see you just getting more and more and more kind of powerful in your messaging, just because you're getting all of us listening to it. And I just love it. You're kind of fearless, which is cool. I think that's kind of my favorite stories, is not the stories of we're trying to fix something, we're trying to cater to something, but it's like, no, we're really just trying to get people proud about this. And I love that you're going out and you're just trying to create pride for a lot of people, everyone really. So yeah, so I think we hit everything. I think I could definitely see why you got the Elevate Creatives Fund. I can definitely see why you were definitely one of the recipients for that. For any of our viewers, what's some good places where they could find you and find more information?
Yeah, so if you are on social media, you can follow me at I'm Tiffany Yu. That's the letter I, the letter M, followed by my first and last name. I may circle back with you when my pre-order link comes available.
Yeah, please do.
You can put it in the show notes. And if you want to follow Diversability, we are at Diversability across social platforms as well. No matter where you are on your disability journey, we have a community available for you as well.
Awesome.
And yeah, I think those are the best places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany. You've been a great guest. We definitely want you on in the future. Maybe once you get the book kind of live and out there in people's hands, it'd be great to have you back on.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah, with that being said, is there anything that you forgot to mention, or did we hit it all?
I don't know if we can hit it all in an hour, but
the struggle is real.
But yeah, I think what I often tell people is like listening to this episode is a catalyst for your own anti-ableism journey. So if you heard something that you were like, ooh, I don't know if I agree with that, I want to go do more research, or Tiffany mentioned that stat, let me go look at the research report, you can go dig in.
Yeah, we will definitely list those resources in the comments down below, or in the description, I should say. And yeah, because there is help out there, and there's funds that will enable you to do certain things and to spread your message.
Yeah, and just yet again to highlight what you said, you're not alone out there, and I love that. I think we'll definitely be sharing these links. We'll share your story, and I think for anyone listening, follow Tiffany, and I think you're going to find that you're not alone, and there's lots of power in this stuff. So but yeah, thank you so much, Tiffany, and thank you everyone for tuning in.